Welcome to the Western Bowel podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted by the first of each month. The content of the podcasts is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Neither Attracted Nor Repelled, The Value of Cultivating Equanimity on the Path. The talk was given by Nachama Greenwald on September 9th, 2017 in Prescott, Arizona. Nachama is a physical therapist, musician, writer, and one of the editors of Sahaja magazine, a publication on Western bowel practice. She was a member of the blues band, Shri, which performed Western bowel music, touring Europe with them in the summers for 17 years. Nachama Greenwald.
I'm really happy to see each of you here, and I appreciate you coming. And I hope that you find something useful from the talk this evening. And I would invite you to participate either with a comment or a question. Just raise your hand and I would be happy to listen to what you have to say. Okay, sometimes things get, certain things get generated from your questions and your comments. I can't think of everything to say, so you might really have something to add. So I'm just, no pressure, just feel free, okay, to participate. So the title of the talk is Neither Attracted Nor Repelled, The Value of Cultivating Equanimity on the Path. And I wanted to begin by saying that it's unquestionable to me that there is value in having equanimity on the spiritual path. But we may not all consider ourselves to be formally on path. I think a lot of people actually don't. However, we're all in the same boat because we are all, every single one of us, we are pilgrims on the path of life. And we all go through the same things. We may express it differently. The circumstance may vary from person to person, but we all are subject to the same uncertainties, fluctuations. Things can change, come out of left field. We're all at the effect of what attracts us and repels us, what we grasp for and what we push away from us. It's in our conditioning. So because we all go through that, whether we consider ourselves to be on a path or not, I think there is most definitely value in having equanimity. And if that's not clear, hopefully by the end of the evening it will be clear. But I want to take it a step further and say that not only is there value, but I think it's imperative. I think it's absolutely imperative to have equanimity, because not only are we at the effect of experiences and circumstances and things changing and things being in flux, but we live in a world that is so troubled and so turbulent, and things are so dire in so many ways. And the forces of darkness are really, there are always forces of light, but the forces of darkness are really magnified at this time, and everything is very destabilized. So if we want to be able to hold our seat with dignity and poise in the world, if we want to have some measure of internal stability as things are manifesting as they are, it is most important to have equanimity. There's an Ayurvedic doctor and Jyotish or Indian astrologer named Robert Svoboda. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. But he's an astrologer, an Indian astrologer. And according to Indian astrology, we are living in the age of Rahu. And Rahu is one of the 9 grahas, or 9 planets. And Rahu is represented as a big giant head with no body. So Rahu is symbolic of greed and insatiability, and that's what's ruling our world. And is that not true? There is tremendous insatiability and greed everywhere we turn. So for our own personal harmony, composure, peace of mind, and for a way of being in the world and dealing with the world and having like an anchor of sanity and stability, I think equanimity is essential. The Buddha said that in degenerative times, that genuine spiritual teachings have greater effectiveness. They're more effective. There's greater urgency, there's greater effectiveness. So in a way, with things being as troubled and turbulent as they are, this is an optimal time to find genuine spiritual teachings, to read genuine spiritual teachings, to listen to them, and to practice them. And equanimity is a principle, it's a practice that we see in the yogic tradition, we see it in the Hindu tantric tradition, we see it in the Buddhist tradition. It's in many, many different traditions, it's just called different things. And there was a Zen teacher that once said, it was something like, good situation, bad situation, bad situation, good situation. Meaning that things that look bad, there may be something good that comes out of it, because from the standpoint of practice, when things are in the state that they're in degenerative times, like in the times that we live in, we may even say it's auspicious, it's a fertile time. It's a very fertile time for practicing the Dharma. And equanimity is one of those principles that's really woven into the Dharma. It's woven into genuine spiritual teachings of many different traditions. And if we look at the things that occur in our everyday, ordinary lives, because that's what we want to be looking at. We don't just want to consider these principles in some kind of abstract or even general or esoteric way. We really want to get down into the nitty-gritty aspect of our daily lives. And if we look at all of the things that happen to us on a daily basis, there are many things that act as a gauge or as a mirror to show us where we're at with how much equanimity we have. How little equanimity do we have? How easily is our equanimity disturbed? Like, for example, we're driving in traffic. Somebody cuts us off. Or let's say, like something that happened to me the other day, there's this big, monstrous, jacked up truck that's like tailgating me, even though I'm going, over the speed limit. It's like right on my back bumper. So it's like, what happens to us when our equanimity can potentially be disturbed? Because, when things are going well, we hit the green lights, we're not sick, we have enough food to eat, we're not in the path of a hurricane. My 83-year-old mother is right in the path of the hurricane, and she's not evacuating because she lives on the second floor. So she's like, she's determined to just stay there. She's got her windows, all the things that you're supposed to do. But we're not in the path of a hurricane or an earthquake. It's really easy to say, wow, I really have equanimity. I'm doing a really good job with that, I'm proud of myself. But what happens when things aren't going our way? Like traffic. Let's say somebody insults us, doesn't give us the acknowledgement that we want to have, that we would like to have from them. How do we do with that? How do we do when we get sick and we have to stay in bed? We can't do the things that we normally do. How do we do when we go through a health crisis? I was working on this talk about a week ago, and I was sitting at the dining room table at our house, and we have this open floor plan. So it's like the dining room, living room, and kitchen. It's all one space. I'm writing at the dining room table. A fly comes out of nowhere and gets right up in my face. It's buzzing around my eyes. It's buzzing in my ear. I'm shooing the fly away, keep writing. Fly goes away, fly comes back, shoo the fly away. Fly goes away, fly comes back. We're playing this little game back and forth. I was getting really annoyed. And finally, I just started yelling. Nobody was home, it was just me. But I'll share this with you, So I say to the fly, look, you've got the whole friggin' space to fly around, and why do you have to be here in my face? And I'm going, oh, I can put that in my talk because it's about equanimity, and look at what's happening to me. It's a little tiny fly. It doesn't take much to set us off, really. So life is all of the daily occurrences, circumstances, actions, events. Let us know very clearly where we stand with how much equanimity we have. So it's our mirror, it's our gauge, and it's our training ground. That's the way we practice with equanimity. That's the way we practice with not being attracted or repelled, is through these little, it doesn't have to be some big dramatic thing. It can be, I'm like confessing, it was a fly. And I was annoyed. I was really annoyed. What about just dealing with someone, that we work with that annoys us, highly annoys us? How much equanimity do we have? Do we fly off the handle? Do we look the other way and not relate to them? Like, how do we do? So that's really what we want to be looking at in our daily lives. When we talk about not being attracted or repelled, we are always dealing with our conditioning and our conditioned habits. Because, like I was saying before, we are all in the same boat. We all want to push away what we don't like, what doesn't feel good, what hurts, what's painful, what doesn't fit in our comfort zone, and we want to grasp for what we're attracted to, what feels good. Oh, somebody just praised me and told me what a good job I did on this talk. It's like, oh, I like that. We all do that. So we are always dealing with our cultural conditioning, our human, primate conditioning, our psychological conditioning, our survival strategies. We get into fight or flight. So we're always up against that. So it requires some effort. So we don't just go with the flow of our conditioning. So it's something important to keep in mind. And when we talk about what attracts us and what repels us, we are talking about being at the effect of these polarities because, everybody in this room, we live in duality. If we lived in non-duality, like the great, spiritual masters talk about, if we lived in that state, we wouldn't have to be dealing with this because we would be in a state of union with reality, with the divine. We wouldn't be at the effect of the push and pull of these opposites and these polarities, but we live in duality. So we are having to deal with the push and pull of the polarities and opposites, sorrow, joy, pleasure, pain, praise, insult, success, failure, health, sickness. And we tend to be at either end of the polarity, like with our likes and our dislikes, for example. I like it, I really don't like it. This feels good, this is really painful. So we're kind of like, like this from one end. So here are these opposites, these polarities, what attracts us, what repels us, our desires, our aversions. But then what about all this space in the middle? Here, what about what's between them? So the mind tends to go with either or. It's either this or it's that. It's either ugly or it's beautiful. It's either good or it's bad. That's, generally not, there are always exceptions. It's the things that I'm saying it's because I'm trying to illustrate a principle. So there's all this space in the middle and vast space. And that's where equanimity lies. What attracts us, what repels us, equanimity. And I call that the sweet spot. Or we could call it the soft spot. We could call it the vulnerable spot. Because it's the place that we're in before the mind hardens into negativity, fixation, and grasping. So it's that softer, more vulnerable space between these opposites, between what attracts us and repels us. And we're very much identified with what we like and what we don't like, what we desire, what we, push away from us. Our identification is sunk into it. Our reference points are fixed. It's here and it's here. And if we really start to look at it, we will see that it really shapes our perception of ourselves, our self-expression, our perception of others, our worldview. I like our president. I don't like our president. I really like this person. I can't stand this person. We're always going, if we look at ourselves, we will see that we spend a lot of time thinking about it. We spend a lot of time talking about it because there's a lot of passion and drama in it. What we're attracted to and what repels us. We tend to have strong fixation, strong reactivity to it if we really look at ourselves. And that's where they are, and this is where equanimity lies here. So it shapes our perception of ourselves, our definitions of ourselves. It's in a lot of our conversations. It's in our thinking. I don't know about your thinking, but it's in a lot. Sometimes when I just sit down, like if I'm meditating or something, I listen to I'm like paying attention to my thoughts, and it's like there I am going on with some reactivity to something. Something I just am either wanting to pull towards me or push away from me. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. And the thing about that is that there's familiarity in that, It's familiar to us. There's stability in it. There's solidity in it. It's like, it's part of what we identify with. We identify with either here or here, not necessarily of that space in the middle between them. That's the space of equanimity. But we're also stuck there. Our reference points are fixated there. And so because of that, we are fixed and identified with it. And when we begin to move in the direction of having equanimity, not only is there greater internal harmony and balance, but there is greater freedom. It's very freeing because we are freed up from the fixation of our reference points, of what attracts us, We're not held down by it. We're not anchored down to it anymore. And I think that maybe this will come a little bit clearer if it's not clear now. And, it's like we may say, if we're thinking about, well, equanimity would be something good to have in life, but we may be tempted to say, well, it sounds so boring. It's so flat and neutral and uninteresting and like a big gray zone, and there's no drama and there's no passion in it, just kind of flat. We may be tempted to think that. It's not like that, though, because when we are talking about being neither attracted nor repelled, when we are talking about having equanimity, it's never about repression. It's never about rejection. It's never about denial. It's not like something comes up for us and we feel ourselves going into that grasping or pushing away. Oh, better, keep it down here because I'm trying to have equanimity. We allow everything to be there that comes up for us. We're never rejecting. We're never repressing anything. It's a very, very important point. Okay, because then it's not a real, genuine practice of equanimity. Then it just gets into repression, and trying to keep something down, to make something good so that you feel okay about it. And that's not what this practice is about. And if we are moving in the direction of having equanimity, then we want to take a look at what attracts us and repels us. We want to take a look at our desires and aversions, because we may think, oh, I'm really choosing this. I'm really choosing to feel this way. I'm really choosing to, grasp for this. I'm really choosing to push this away. But if we look deeper, we will see that it's oftentimes so knee-jerk mechanical, what we like and what we don't like. It's very mechanical for all of us. It's based on our conditioning. It's based on our past history. It's based on not just our personal or our family condition, our cultural conditioning. It's based on our psychology. So if we want to have equanimity, again, instead of repressing and rejecting, we want to bring what our desires and our aversions are, what attracts us and repels us. We want to bring it up into more of a conscious awareness. We want to be more aware of it. We want to get to know ourselves. What do I desire? What is it that I'm repelled from? What is it that attracts us? We want to take it from the more knee-jerk, unconscious, mechanical realm and have a more conscious and more intimate relationship of self-awareness, so that we actually get to know, we taste more consciously what we like, what we don't like. That's part of it, because again, we don't want to repress anything. We want to bring everything up into some kind of conscious relationship to it. Here's a quote from Chogyam Trungpa. Have you heard of him? He's a Tibetan teacher. Came over from Tibet, lived in America, set up centers in Nova Scotia in America, and he died in the 1980s. But he had a lot of good things to say. So this is a quote from him. He uses the word equilibrium, but actually equilibrium and equanimity are the same thing. So this is what Chogyam Trungpa says. It should be quite clear that equilibrium does not mean becoming a jellyfish or an even-tempered ape. In this case, in the case of having equanimity, you have command of the whole world. You have tremendous confidence in dealing with your world. Therefore, you don't have to push anything either positively or negatively. You don't have to dwell on anything or exaggerate anything. So he's describing this internal state of what it means to have equilibrium. And the key thing that he is saying is that we don't push anything. We allow it to be, there's positive and negative, but we're not pushing it. We're not pushing it towards the positive. We're not pushing it towards the negative. You don't have to dwell on anything or exaggerate anything. You don't have to obsessively fixate on something. You don't have to grasp for something. You allow it to be there. And what he is saying is that when we do this, we come to live in a bigger world. We're in a bigger world. And he says, and I would believe him because he knew about this. He was a realized being that he says we have command of the whole world. There's tremendous confidence because we are not fixated in these reference points of what attracts us and repels us. We're not allowing ourselves to move into these fluctuations because they're constant. They happen all the time. And when we do this, there's a kind of freedom and the world opens up to us in a much bigger way. And maybe some of you have had that experience, where you have experienced being able to have equanimity in a situation maybe that was challenging, and you experience a kind of freedom and expansiveness, perhaps. So as I was saying, equanimity is written about and spoken about in all these different traditions, including the yoga tradition. And Swami Shivananda he's like a Hindu yoga master that spoke about equanimity. And he said that equanimity was about remaining cheerful in adverse conditions. That's kind of not so easy. It's easy to remain cheerful when things are going our way. But what happens when we're in adverse conditions, whatever those conditions are, So how can we remain cheerful? He also says it's having the forbearance and the presence of mind to bear insult and injury. So, and I think when he's talking about injury, he's not talking about if somebody like beats us up or something like that, but more of like emotional, psychological injury. So he's talking about that equanimity is having a balanced response, whether there's success, failure, pleasure, pain, whether somebody is praising us or insulting us, and whether we're eating a gourmet meal with a glass of wine or we're eating boiled potatoes and water. Really, that's what it comes down to. How much equanimity do we have when we're eating really simple food? And I can testify to this because I was in a band for almost 17 years, and we were on the road every summer in Europe. And it's one thing when you're in your own kitchen and you cook what you want, you have complete control over your environment. But when you're traveling in all these different countries, you don't know what people are going to serve you. And I had some really bad meals. And I was like writing this, I was remembering that there was one, I think we were in this rural area somewhere. And our dinner was Coca-Cola, beer, waterlogged vegetables, and overcooked potatoes, and a salt shaker. That was the whole meal. I'm not kidding. That was it. And no dessert. No bread. And that's what we had. So how much equanimity do we have when we're faced with a situation like that? And I have to say we did quite well. There was a little bit of grumbling, afterwards, but, the practice is you eat what's served to you. and then thank the people. I mean, it wasn't like we had food poisoning. It wasn't like, our health was in danger. But there was a way of just, that's what they made. Maybe they cooked it. Maybe that's how they cook all their food in this village, perhaps. But, thank you. Thank you for the food. Thank you for making the food. That's a way of having equanimity. Would we have preferred something else? Yes, probably. But that's what we were served. And it was better than not having any food at all. So how much equanimity do we have in a situation like that? So we're talking about having this particular response to situations rather than a response that's kind of born out of reactivity and emotion. So we learn how to ride the waves of our experience without getting tangled up in reaction and reactivity before the mind hardens into fixation and negativity. This is a definition I found of equanimity when I was looking. I always look for, anytime I do a talk, I take the title and I look up the keywords in the dictionary. It's just like something I do. So this is one definition of equanimity. Being in pure awareness, our true nature, that which is unchanging in all circumstances. So the circumstances of our outer lives and our outer environment do not dictate our inner state. So we don't get, when we had the waterlogged vegetables and the boiled potatoes, we don't get like bent out of shape and like run over to the cook and say, how could you make us? Make us something else. We are hungry. We've been on the road all day. We have to play for 3 hours. It's like there's this inner poise because that inner state doesn't change with the fluctuation of external circumstances. So it's our own, I call it the sweet spot, but it's our own sanctuary. It's like an internal sanctuary to have that. Otherwise, God, we can be really miserable, I think. That's my experience of my own lack of equanimity. And when we can do that, yes, there's more freedom, there's more composure, and there's radical acceptance. So what does that mean? What is radical acceptance? What's not radical acceptance is conditional acceptance. So we accept what we like, what feels good. This was a really good meal. I liked it. And we don't accept what we don't like. Waterlogged vegetables and boiled potatoes and 1 salt shaker for 9 people. It's like, so our acceptance is conditional based on our grasping and our pushing away. So that's not radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is unconditional acceptance. It's when we accept it all. We accept the waterlogged vegetables and potatoes. We accept the gourmet meal. We accept everything. We accept the joy. We accept the sorrow. We accept it all, whether we like it or not. And the analogy that's used is like a banquet. I've read this before. It's like a banquet, and we're at this banquet, and we open the door, and we invite everyone in. We invite our joy, we invite our sorrow, we invite failure, we invite success, we invite illness, we invite health, we invite what we perceive as being ugly, we invite beauty. So we open the door and we let all of it, we let all of these things sit at the banquet table with us. And that's what radical acceptance is. It's a tall order. It's not like something we can just do overnight like that, but it's something that can happen over a lifetime of practice with consistency. And that sounds pretty good to me. I would like to be able to do that. I would like to be able to invite everyone to my banquet, to invite all of these different polarities, opposites, instead of going no to this, yes to this, which is all based on the conditional. Does that make sense?
Well, what about situations that are toxic? I mean, is there room to make choices to not be around certain things because they're not good for you?
There's always discrimination. Always. So we're not being stupid about it. You know what I mean? We're not being just like, oh yeah, just open the door. Anybody. There's always, and that's a good point, because there's always discrimination. You know what I mean? We're using discrimination in everything. So there may be a situation that we don't want to open the door to, the door of our banquet room, because it is toxic and it really detracts us from our true aim and purpose, of why we're here and what we're doing. So I would say that there are situations that we wouldn't, but still, even with the toxic situation, I don't know if you have a specific example, but there's still a way to make use of it, even if it's just by seeing it and knowing that for ourselves. So there's always a way to make use of anything that happens in our lives. So this is from the yoga guy, Swami Shivananda. He was the one that was talking about remaining cheerful in adverse circumstances. He makes some good distinctions. He says, when we open to the truth that there is actually very little we can control other than our own reactions to circumstances, we learn to let go. So there's a relationship between equanimity and surrender, because we see, I can't control this. And we are able to let go. And when we do that, it already puts us more in a place of equanimity. And when we do have equanimity, we're in a place where it's easier to, it lends itself to being able to surrender to what we can. It works both ways, to what we can control. So there's an element of surrender, because there's a lot of things we can't control, like the hurricanes and the earthquakes and everything, all the intensity that's going on right now everywhere. He also talks about dealing with he calls it, let's see, what's the word that he used? The non-virtuous deeds of others. He says that when we are dealing with the non-virtuous deeds of others, there are a lot of those in the world. But when we are looking at the non-virtuous, when we are dealing with the non-virtuous deeds of others, when we have equanimity, we have just a little bit more spaciousness, a little bit more empathy to see that those that cause suffering to others are themselves really suffering also. And we have the eyes to see the suffering of those that cause suffering to others. We're not getting into politics, okay? We're not going there. But just in general. And I think for us too, our own non-virtuous deeds. We all have those, right? And when we have equanimity, we're able to have compassion for maybe the suffering that we were going through that caused out to lash out at someone else, like when we're jealous of someone, when we're envious of someone, when we're competitive with someone, it could be in any number of things, anything that would cause us to act in what he calls a non-virtuous way. He also says that equanimity gives you the energy to persist, regardless of the outcome, because you are connected to the integrity of the effort itself. And I really like this distinction, because he's saying that when we want a particular outcome or result, we're like this, most of us. We want it, this is what we want to have happen. And there's a particular kind of grasping that goes on. But when we are resting in that sweet spot of equanimity, then we're able to be better aligned just with the integrity of the effort we're making, regardless of what the results are. Does that make sense to you? So this is just a distinction that he's making. Anybody have any, before I move on to something else? Questions, comments, disagreements?
Yeah, to me it just seems like what you're describing is like when I encounter someone that's like a really like intense meditator, and then they're just very like, they'll think about what they're gonna say before they say it, just like intentional with like how they respond to people, and not like letting people like take advantage of them or like put themselves in like toxic situations. Like just like being just like very aware of like any kind of actions or words that you put out there that could affect other people.
So you're saying that would be an example of
Equanimity, just like someone that
yeah.
has a lot of equanimity. It's just like, because like kind of trying to find that distinction between like just being very passive and like disconnected and then like having equanimity. Because I think it can be like
Exactly.
misunderstood like that kind of.
Good point. That's a really excellent point, because somebody could look like they have equanimity, but they're just like completely detached and passive and maybe even fearful or something. So yeah, great, thank you. Like I'm sorry, I'm just like on this thing about the waterlogged vegetables and the potatoes. I was so hungry. I mean, I was so tired. We hadn't got much sleep the night before. I didn't feel like playing. I was in a really bad mood. People in the band were fighting with each other, and it's like when we were driving to our destination, I was like, oh, I can't wait to have dinner, because that's what happens when you're on the road. You get excited about things like just meals, or about having coffee in the morning, or selling a lot of CDs or something like that. And so, it's like I saw the meal and I went, damn. I was so upset about it. But you work with it internally. It's not like I was like, I saw it, I'm chilled out, I have equanimity, it's good. It wasn't like that at all. I had to work through things. We're not repressing. I didn't repress my disappointment, my anger at the chef for overcooking everything. Like, none of that was going, I wasn't doing any of that. I let myself feel what I was feeling. But you don't necessarily manifest it, So it's like you work with, there's always this balance between what's going on in here and how you manage, you integrate it, you digest it, and then what comes out here. And the thing to do was not like stand up and be a raving maniac about it. It was just because really, I was in a bad mood. That's why I remember it, because I was particularly, it was not a good day. And that's what our big meal of the day was. So, it's like, yes, absolutely. There should always be passion. We shouldn't be, it's like Chogyam Trungpa said, we're not being an even-tempered ape. That's not what it's about. There's always room for passion. It's more about the relationship between how we grasp and how we push away. But there's lots of space for all emotions, for all feelings to arise in us as they should.
So something that I was wondering is about like knowing when to act on something and knowing what you have control over. And especially like with toxic environments and behaviors that you see in other people, whether it's like a personal relationship or on a larger scale, like problems in your community or in the government. Like, how do you decide when to, because like you can accept it, but when to do something about it? Like having passion for like activism, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does that, how would you address that?
I think that equanimity is woven into everything we do. It's part of everything we do, whether there's activism or whether there's not activism. It's not like we're sitting like this, I have no passion, I'm not doing anything, I just have equanimity. That's not what it is. So, I used to be involved in a lot of social activism at a different point in my life. And I felt really called to do that. So I think that it's not like there's the same answer for everybody. You have to see what's true for you. And in terms of, because I think that there's really a time it's not the way for everyone, social activism. Other people do it through prayer, through singing, through meditation. There's different ways of going about responding to what's happening in the world. Is that what you were asking about in terms of the government and being? And what was the other thing you said? It was something about when to say something to someone else. What was the other part of that?
When to stand up for yourself, or just trying to determine when you have enough control or when you have enough power to make a change, and whether it's worth disrupting that balance in order to improve the situation or improve the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a time to really speak up. And because if you're trying to superimpose some kind of balance or equanimity on it, won't be true equanimity. So we have to, it's like, when when Vijay was talking about being in the van with 8 other people, there are a lot of things to work out. And to just passively just not do anything, there was a point where that became very toxic to do that, and it was really important to speak up. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the cost? Sometimes the cost is really high to not speak up, and we have to say something. I know that's something, equanimity as a principle is something that, is relevant and applies to many things, but it's not like it's one thing covers everything. We have to be looking at all these different facets. So sometimes I know for myself that I've really tried to speak up for myself and what's true for me, instead of being more adaptive, instead of going, I'm just going to be really chilled out about this and I'm not going to say anything. And I guess I could fool myself into thinking that that's equanimity, but that's just repression. Now, there is a time to not say something. It's not the same every single circumstance. But for me, to speak up and to say what was true for me, in a sense, helped me to have more just peace of mind with myself. And I think equanimity, in a sense, is about peace of mind. So it's a really good question, and we could spend a lot of time on it, because, it really depends on the circumstance, and it depends on the person. I know that for myself, that I have spoken up with certain people and spoken up repeatedly more than once, and then have gotten to the point where I went, it's just not doing any good. So then I had to work with it in a different way, digest it in a different way. It's like riding the waves of your experience without getting tangled up in reactivity, because once we get into a kind of negativity, kind of reactivity, the mind hardens and fixates around it, and then we get stuck in it.
So you were talking earlier about you can recognize that someone else is lashing out because of their own suffering. And so how do you deal with that person expressing their suffering onto you in a balanced way? Because obviously, that's not healthy for them, it's not healthy for you. Mm-hmm. And you can accept that. But it's not productive to just be like, I know why they're doing this, and accepting it for what it is. You want to make some type of change.
Well, that's kind of a tough question, because you don't just necessarily, you want to be able to see the suffering that person experiences that would cause someone else's suffering, but you don't necessarily want to be a doormat. You don't want to be a victim of it. So you can say something to them, but you want to use skillful means. If you just, lash out and you're tangled up in that, if you're hooked and you're reactive, it's going to be really hard to communicate what you're trying to say. But if you can have a kind of equanimity in the face of it, which is, that could be challenging, then you can communicate skillfully what you're trying to say in a way that doesn't drain you, because you're being so reactive to it. So, yes, I think it's important to say something. You don't want to necessarily be at the effect of it. But a lot of times it's like it's how you say something to someone. And if you can communicate, and it doesn't mean that person's going to listen either. It depends on how workable that person is. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I have felt tremendously served at times by somebody not reacting back at me when I've, kind of just all over them or whatever. It's like, because it has this effect of like it mirrors you to yourself. I mean, so like if the person I'm, venting something on doesn't actually react in the way that most of us usually do, so has some kind of equanimity or presence in themselves, like that's been a tremendous service to me, because it's like instantly, even without anything being said, it's like you almost hear your own voice echoing in the space and see what you kind of go, oh my God, like in a way that you don't if somebody immediately comes at you and then it's just this fight and it, so but it is, I agree, it is tricky because there's no formula for it.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah. Sometimes it's really important, I think, too, for any one of us to hear or to communicate to someone else, like how we feel about what, what's going on. Because that can be really, that also can be as transformative to really get how you've affected someone, so.
I mean, not everything, exactly. And not everything's about equanimity and staying calm. We're, like I was saying in the very beginning, I mean, there's everything that we deal with, just in the course of being human beings in our lives, not to mention the intensity of the world that we live in. So there's all kinds of, this is just one aspect. Equanimity is one principle that has value, for us, in many ways, but it doesn't handle everything. It's not like, well, hey, just have equanimity and you'll be good. We have to get into, Chogyam Trungpa. I was going to talk about this a little bit later on, but you could probably tell that I really like him a lot. He inspires me. The Tibetan teacher that I was mentioning that was talking about not being an even-tempered ape, that guy. So he says that he talks a lot about magic. And he says, we think magic is going to come from this extraordinary realm, some esoteric, amazing, that's where magic is going to manifest from. But he says the greatest magic that there is the magic of working with your own mind. That's the greatest magic of working with your own ego, of disciplining the mind. He goes, that is the greatest magic. And that if we want to experience and to know and live with magic, the only way to do that is through ordinary life, through the fabric of ordinary life. That is how we encounter magic. Let me just read something that he said about that. I don't know, it's just something that's coming to mind with what you're saying. He says, magic is relating with the world on as ordinary a level as possible. The question of magic is completely relevant to our lives, to our path, to our actual practice. Magic is very real, direct, and personal. It is so personal that it becomes excruciating. We are so, because in Buddhism, you are dealing with reality. When you are dealing with reality, you want to be dealing with reality as directly as possible, without the interference of your concepts, your projections, everything that goes on in your mind. You want to be like right there in the present moment. That's where magic is. And he says it's so personal, it can be excruciating. So equanimity, as we've been talking about, that is considered a level of magic, because as we go deeper into ordinary life, that's where we practice that. That's our training ground, and that's when we are able to work with them. We work with our minds when we're working with equanimity. We are training our minds, and he's saying that's magic. So, to get back to what you're saying, I think everybody, added another piece, and the bottom line is that it's not formulaic. There's not like one thing that you can do every time, but we have to know ourselves, and we have to know when it's right for us to say something and when it's right to not say something. It's not always, sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's a timing of when you say something to someone. But I have found, as someone who has not spoken up, because I was censored when I was growing up, and there were consequences for me to express anything. So it's been a lifelong. It's taken me years to get to the point where I can just, say something to someone who's like causing me suffering in a way. So for me, it's scary, but it's really good. But there's a lot of things to pay attention to: who I'm speaking to, how I'm saying it, what my timing is, the way in which how aggressively am I coming across. All of those things like play into it. It's not about, we're not rejecting or repressing anything that's coming up for us. This is not like a fake thing where we want to appear to be a certain way. We've got to make this real for ourselves. And, the way that we make it real for ourselves is, again, it's like going back to the banquet analogy. If you're hurt by someone, that's you see that they're suffering where they're coming from, but they're doing something that's hurtful to you, you invite that in and you let that be there. If you are going to get to real equanimity, if you are going to get to true, authentic equanimity, you have to go in through your emotions, through being honest with what's going on for you.
Sometimes, if you get into it with somebody, and just whatever's going on, like if there's some conflict or disagreement, like to be able to stay in relationship with someone, that's really uncommon. That really takes a lot of maturity. We disagree, okay, and sometimes the other person won't do it, and it's like kind of really trying to push you to get like out of control, to even when there's a big disagreement about something, to stay in a relationship with that person is a part of practice for me.
Yeah.
When I remember it.
Yeah, it's not always so easy, because see, I think that is I think that's equanimity, what you're describing, that you're having difficulty with someone, but you stay in relationship because you're not so at the effect of what repels you, what you want to push away from you, that you're out of relationship with them. So equanimity in that situation would look exactly like that, would be staying in relationship with someone. Even with the conflict, even if you're saying you disagree with them, even if you've had fights with them, that to me is equanimity.
Or at least working on cultivating it.
On cultivating it. I think any time we make any effort at all, we're just doing it already. Maybe it's not, they say, this is the next thing I was going to talk about. In the tradition of yoga, they say that the highest yogic state, the highest yoga that there is the yoga of equanimity. It's the highest. It's in Hinduism, they say that in Hinduism it's called ekarasa. Ekarasa means basically one taste. And I haven't talked about this yet, but it's something similar to equanimity. And it's like that state is considered a higher state than samadhi. Samadhi is like what you see, you might see like an advanced practitioner or yogi in India who's in, or some of the great spiritual masters that are in a state of absorption in the divine. That they live in that state. But the yoga, the state of equanimity is considered higher than any of the other states. It's considered a very high state. Because when we are reliable in having equanimity, the mind is not at the effect of all these fluctuations. Because when we're at the effect of the push and pull of what we accept, what we reject, what attracts us, what repels us, our desires, our aversions, what we like, what we don't like, the mind is constantly going from one to the other. And what's missing is sometimes there can be real confusion. We get confused. And when there's confusion, it's harder to perceive what's called in the yogic tradition sat, or truth. We can't perceive the truth because we're just going back and forth with all of these fluctuations. So when we begin to have equanimity, we have greater clarity, and it's just easier to perceive the truth of things just in, not some like great ultimate truth, but just the truth in the moment. Because sometimes we get confused. It's like, is it this that's going on? Is that going on? And, it's like to have clarity. I think it's like it's beginning to become more and more important to me just to have clarity, in my life, to have clarity on the path, to begin to train my mind, which is where the magic is, to train my mind in such a way where I'm not so, tossed and turned by everything, that I can have some degree of clarity. And so when we can do that reliably, in the yoga tradition, they say it's the highest yoga that there is. Are you all familiar with Ayurvedic medicine? Have you heard of that? It's really cool. It's the Indian system of medicine, basically. It's very different than Western medicine. And in the Ayurvedic tradition, there are 3 what are called gunas, or tendencies. There's sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. We all have all 3 of them. None of them are bad, or it's not like have one and don't have any. We need all 3. But we have them in different degrees, different amounts. So the tamasic tendency is kind of about sluggishness, dullness, apathy, kind of a heaviness. That's what the tamasic tendency is. And in Ayurveda, the ideal diet is a vegetarian diet. So they say eat different foods if you want to encourage these tendencies. So because the optimal diet is a vegetarian diet, a diet that encourages more of that tamasic tendency is meat. Encourages that kind of that heaviness, that slowness. And then there's the rajasic tendency. The rajasic tendency is fire and action and passion and movement. And the foods that encourage that tendency are caffeine and spicy foods. And then the sattvic tendency is the tendency of balance, steadiness, harmony, which is considered the ideal tendency or guna to have for spiritual practice. So I'm not saying we should all be vegetarians. I'm not saying that all. So the foods that are associated with the sattvic tendency are fruits and vegetables and grains. So, The point being is that even our diet can play a part in how much equanimity we have, considering our diet. Let's say we would like to have more equanimity when we're driving in traffic, but we've had 4 cups of coffee, And it's like, is that going to encourage us in the direction of equanimity? Or is it going to maybe, create a little bit of a problem there? Is it going to deter us? So, I like caffeine. So it's like, again, I'm not saying we should have one particular diet or the other. It really varies according to the person. The point, though, is that the foods that we eat, even down to the level of diet, can help us to cultivate equanimity or maybe detract from it. So just looking at our diet, what foods are we eating? What about meditation? A meditation practice can be really helpful in cultivating equanimity, because with meditation, hopefully, you develop the ability to just have more space before you react. You pause. You're able to pause more instead of having this like mechanical reactivity to something. You just have a little bit more space to pause. It can be very helpful in cultivating equanimity. And then the other thing is, I was talking about Robert Svoboda before, the Ayurvedic doctor and the astrologer, and he's always saying, make sure that your prana or your life force is circulating well in your body. Make sure that your life force is circulating well in your body. So, good flow of life force. And so what does that mean? It means, for one thing, that we want to pay attention to our breath. How are we breathing? Because, I'm a physical therapist, and a lot of people come in with neck pain. And I say, take a deep breath for me. How do you breathe? That's how they breathe. They breathe with their neck muscles and their upper ribs and their shoulders, but there's nothing going on in the belly area. So even something as simple as paying attention to our breath, making sure that we are breathing from here, can help us move along in the direction of having equanimity. It can be simple things. Remember, Chogyam Trungpa says that's where the magic is. The magic is in it's being in the trenches of our everyday lives. That's where the magic is. That's where the work is. That's where our training is. That's where we, fall down and we have to get back up and try again. So it's like we can just pay attention to our breath and make sure we should all be breathing from here and not from here. I can't believe how many people don't know how to breathe. Most people, unless you're a trained singer or martial artist or something like that, but a lot of people do not breathe properly. And even the way we breathe, can help us to have equanimity, or at least move in that direction. So our breath, our diet, meditation, all of these things can all play a part.
Yeah.
And when we're getting ready to, if there's somebody that, you want to say something to that's hurt you, or you feel like you need to say something to them, you can check in with yourself. How am I breathing? I mean, really, I give that as an exercise to some of my patients. It's like they think they're going to be lifting weights, and I say, lie down on your back, put your hands on your diaphragm every single day for 5 minutes. Like, that's so simple. Exactly. It's simple, but it's really, really essential. So all these simple things that we do in everyday lives can help us with our wanting to have, more equanimity in our lives. But remember, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be passionate and that you should be chill about everything. It's not about that at all. There is a time when you are going to be more measured like this. Yes, that is related to that, but it's much more it's much more than just that. So I want to make sure that's clear. Well, thank you so much for coming and for participating. I really appreciate that. Thank you.